We used to call him the staff of Moses. He was so thin. Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. So,
All right then.
yeah, I guess let's get down to it. I'm going to go ahead and show my slides here. Can you guys see my screen? Because I cannot see it on the view area.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Sounds good. All right, so let's get into it. Divine grace, to me, is probably the most important topic of Christianity, apart from just Jesus as a direct word. It is really what separates Christianity from every other religion. In the statement here on the screen, for if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do that? And nobody likes tax collectors except for other tax collectors. But loving your enemies is a thing that's unique to Christianity, and we'll go through why that is so. Divine grace is something that I have lived off of my entire life. It's something I need every single day. And, let's get into why and take a look at all of that. So let me go ahead and see if I can make my slides work. There we are. In this talk, we'll be covering what divine grace is. We will also be talking about why it's essential for all life. And not just living, but progress as a whole requires it, any form of progress. We'll also talk about why divine grace is only possible through Jesus. We'll do a little tour of some of the major religions and see what they have to say about grace and see how that compares. And then finally, we're going to get into the temporal and eternal consequences of divine grace. So we will look at, what that means today and what that also means from an eternal perspective. Now, let me see if I can get my notes working, because I do have some to help me. There we go. Very good. All right. So part one, what is divine grace exactly? And, the word divine being critical to that. Looking at grace through the Bible, I pulled up a few different translations and just did a search for the word grace to see what the first place it was mentioned in across these various translations. So in the NIV, the first place divine grace is mentioned is in Job. And Job is arguing with his friends a little bit, and one of them's talking about, I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength, or its graceful form. Now, in another spot in the Bible, in Psalm 74, Leviathan's talked about as a multi-headed sea serpent that God killed and gave food to Israel with. He fed Israel by killing it. Not sure what that's all about, but, as a multi-headed sea serpent with limbs, this image here that you can see is pretty much what we got going for grace, I guess. It's a good start. So next time you want to show grace to your enemies or something, you can just throw one of these at them, and that should probably be close enough. So anyway, in the New King James Version of the Bible, the first place that grace is mentioned is in the story of Noah, where the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and subsequently God put him to 60 or 70 years of hard labor and ridicule by having him create the ark. So maybe grace has something to do with that. Not sure. I do find this statement to be really important, though, where, mankind drove God even to his limits a little bit, it seems, where God himself was sorry he had made them. Sometimes, you want to have kids, you want to do these things, and it seems easy. And then when you live with the kids, oh, I love them. And then sometimes they put you in a perspective where it's like, why did I do this? I'm sorry I've made you. Hopefully that's not too often, but it does come up from time to time because things aren't always as easy as they sound, and they don't always go as well as we would like to think. But yeah, divine grace for Noah was 60 years of forced labor and ridicule. Moving right along to the book of Ezra. Ezra was a scribe, and he had this to say about grace in the New Living Translation. But we now have been given a brief moment of grace For the Lord our God has allowed a few of us to survive as a remnant. He has given us security in his holy place. Our God has brightened our eyes and granted us some relief from our slavery. So this story is after Israel was freed from bondage, freed from being slaves. God graced them a few years of peace, also about 60 years, 70 years, similar to how long it took Noah to build the ark, where they created the temple of God, and they just had this brief period of peace before the wars resumed again. So part of the definition of grace is just a brief moment of reprieve. The last example in the English Standard Version, the first mention of grace, has to do with Esther. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Below, you'll see an artist has painted Esther, and I guess she looked exactly like anyone's British aunt. So King may not have had supreme standards, but he likes what he likes, and I can respect that. Another weird thing to note is that human grace and divine grace are very different. All right? Human grace violates fairness. It's unjust. The reason I say that is because of how it's been applied. For example, near my house here, there is a water supply on the mountain, on Big Bear Mountain, where San Bernardino is. And wouldn't you know that the state has granted a quite graceful permit to Nestle to siphon off about 162 million gallons a year of water and then sell it back to the people below. Now, I don't have that kind of grace. I can't go and start a water company on the mountain. I'd like to, but I'm not even allowed to walk on the mountain. So here we see an act of grace extended to Nestle in a unfair capacity. They don't pay anything extra. They make about $8 billion in profits a year or more, and they get to just harvest the water for free. I wonder how they got such wonderful grace. Maybe if we keep studying, we'll figure it out. Another problem with human grace is that it relies on circumstance. So either some political, climate has allowed for this. Someone was entertaining and funny, so they let them get away with a lot, or they were very pretty. One example I'd like to talk about is a guy named Sile Doty, notorious killer, bandit, and thief. So Sile Doty was a guy from the 1800s. He learned blacksmithing at a young age, and he was very talented at it. So God had graced him with skills of blacksmithing, which he then used to create burglary tools and skeleton keys so he could rob everybody. They would do, wonderfully clever things like go into towns, small towns with counterfeit money. They would buy a few things with the counterfeit money and see where the real money was hidden when they would take that money and put it into the store box, so that they could then go and use those nice tools that he made to break in and rob them of their real money. And he did this kind of robbing and lying bit quite a lot. Went to jail for a bit, escaped. He's pretty good at escaping jail. And after escaping, he tried to get some honest work as a farmhand. The problem was, I guess, that his past came back to haunt him, and he ended up killing the guy he worked for. He hid his body in a swamp where he thought no one would find it, and then he left and went on another robbing and thieving spree. For a few years, he was caught, went to jail, and while he was in this secure jail, he did not escape. There's a very good jail, but the body was found of the man that he murdered, so they transferred him to a new jail. During the trial, he wasn't held in quite a secure location, so he managed to cut his way through the floor and escape again. How graceful! After being transferred to the new prison and escaping, he went out and started lying and robbing again, where he was caught, he was recognized, and they took him to jail again. When they took him to jail the second time, or third time, or fifth time, I'm not counting, he escaped again. And it was then that he found the ultimate political grace that's reliant on circumstance, and that was the Mexican-American War. The politicians decided that anyone who would participate in this war would be given grace, and all of their past sins would be forgiven them. They just had to go and kill some Mexicans at that time. So he signed up for that, but he was pretty smart and he avoided the front lines. What Saldoti did was used his God-given graceful talents to steal a really nice horse, the best horse in a competing general's camp, and he rode it to his general's camp. And his general was so impressed with his stealing ability that he made him a messenger and just had him taking care of the horse, and he didn't have to fight in the war. Now, after the war, he went home a free man, complete amnesty, complete grace after murder and robbing and all these other things. And he started stealing again. So after a few years of stealing, he was caught. He did 17 years in prison, didn't get out that time. But when he did get out, he was in his 60s, and he returned to his life of crime and was stealing again. And then he was arrested again, and in his 70s, he was released, where he continued lying and stealing and cheating till the day he died. I feel like this story illustrates some of the problems with human grace. I hope you can agree. It's kind of nonsense. He didn't deserve all of that. Why would you extend an amnesty to a murderer only to have him be repeating the same crimes? He wasn't reformed. He escaped from jail. God graced him with talent. He abused it. Human grace has a lot of problems. For what if Esther herself was born completely undesirable to the king and didn't have beauty? So she would have been the same person, allegedly, but she would have had no grace. And ultimately, Israel would not have, they would not have lived. She basically saved all of Israel by being pretty. That's nice. Let's keep going. So how is divine grace different from human grace? Divine grace is part of God. It's an aspect of God. That's what makes it divine. It's congruent to all of his attributes. So divine grace is not just, well, we got to go kill some people right now, so I'll forgive you. No, it follows through with all of justice. It's upheld completely in justice. It's not, but they didn't earn it. I didn't earn the grace. Jesus paid the debt, but the debt was paid. It wasn't like, we just forgot about that so you can do something for us right now, or we forgot about that because you're pretty. God paid the debt directly, which is why it's also self-sufficient. When God issues divine grace, he doesn't need you to fulfill it. He works independently of external requirements. Jesus paid the entire debt from start to finish. It's also truthful. It doesn't divorce itself from wisdom, where maybe forgiving anyone who would fight in the war, regardless if they were a murdering thief or not, it's not very truthful. It doesn't have a lot of congruency to the history. But with divine grace, Jesus pays the debt all the way through. It's also all powerful. It's not diminished. It doesn't, like if Esther had grown old and became uglier, she may have been found less desirable, and then the king wouldn't have extended his grace to her. God doesn't work like that. We've pushed him to his limits in the days of Noah, sure, but divine grace itself, extended and life allowed to proceed, is not dominated, muted, or superseded by, today God is divinely graceful to you, but tomorrow you tied your shoes really funny, so now he's not going to be divinely graceful to you. It doesn't work that way. It's all powerful. There's pretty much nothing you can do about it but abandon it. It's also all-knowing. God's divine grace understands every detail of everything you have done, past, present, and future. He knows more than you know yourself about you and how much you need his grace. You need his grace in ways you don't even perceive. Finally, it's also based on goodness. It's not just favoritism, like a king favors somebody so he forgives them. He doesn't favor the other guy so he kills them. Doesn't work like that. Jesus pays the debt for anyone who would receive him, but some people just don't want it, so you don't have to take it. But there is a goodness and soundness of thought there where the debt is paid, and it's paid wholly by God, and all you got to do is receive it, but if you don't want it, it's not forced on you. The funny thing about light is that it doesn't succumb to darkness. Even a tiny light, like we see here, this little candle, it banishes the endless darkness around it. You got a huge room of darkness. You may have all kinds of problems in life, but even the tiny light, you just turn it on, and there it is. You know, it doesn't care how much darkness is around it. It just is its own thing. Isaiah had this to say. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. Light overcomes darkness. You know, it doesn't matter how vast it is. Again, another position on this. In Acts, he talks about it, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. That was Jesus talking to Paul when he appeared to him on the road to Damascus, basically explaining his position, where Satan is compared to darkness and Jesus is compared to light. We're going to look at that a little bit more, but Satan is the accuser, and Jesus is the payer of the penalty. So instead of trying to see what he can get from you, he's just trying to give. There's a difference. Even a small amount of light in that position can banish all darkness. There's nothing you can do about it when he just chooses to give. Jesus had this to say about it. He spoke in John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So, you know, grace is important for life. It's, matter of fact, imperative for us. We rely on it. And this theme of light and darkness shows that really all light is based upon that grace, that giving, that loving nature, the attributes of God. And darkness is that exacting, mechanical, logic that ends up saying, hey, they deserve to die. There's no reason to give a perfect person for this. Now, if some of you are cheeky like me and you heard me talking about the light and the darkness, you may say, Jordan, what about black holes? Light doesn't escape from black holes. They're just going to burn that candle down. It doesn't stand a chance. What are you talking about? I got news for you. Cheeky person like me. I'll tell you a little bit about black holes. I take this personally because I was called a black hole before. I was at a conference where they were teaching this thing called NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. And they were trying to teach people to alter their behavior with language. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me take a look at what's going on there. They begin this process by hypnotizing everybody, having them picture the light coming in, except they call it Prometheus. And it was called the Prometheus induction. And I was like, oh, it's a demonic induction. Fun. And I wasn't buying it. Didn't really participate very well with these guys. And a lady came up to me and she said, you are a black hole. And I was like, what? She's like, you're a light-sucking void from which there is no escape. And I said, oh, that's nice. I guess that makes me pretty strong then, right? Huh? No, she left. But that's cool. Anyway, let me tell you some facts about black holes. For they are seeming to be light-sucking voids from which there is no escape. But recently it was discovered that as black holes draw material in, they expel a jet stream of X-rays and other materials, which in turn transcend galaxies like far larger than the black hole itself. The reach extends from galaxy to galaxy, which is an insane distance, even though there are so many. And when the jet streams extend to other galaxies, they actually ignite these star beds, these birthing places of stars, where they're kind of raw materials hanging out. And even though the black hole itself is a star that became very big and tried its best and completely collapsed and is now a light-sucking void, it helps birth other stars all over the universe. So ultimately, light does win. Your candle went out, but it gave you a star back. So please be gentle with my little light and do not harass me, you cheeky person. Anyway, back to divine grace. So here's the mechanics of darkness and light in grace illustrated. I'm going to do this pretty simple. We acted evil and it was dark. I don't think anybody disputes that here. If you don't think you did, you're probably the worst one among us. We died in that darkness, and then the accuser comes and evaluates us, and that was dark. It was dark because it was accurate, and we deserved it. You know, we deserved that death. Then Jesus does something crazy which banishes every level of darkness and pays the sin debt, an act of love. It doesn't make sense. It's a terrible deal. As Donald Trump would say, this has been the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals, maybe ever. And I think that's probably most accurate to this application, but who knows? And then, you know, after that, we got divine grace. We're forgiven. We get to live in light and life, you know, when we deserve to die. That doesn't make sense. That mechanically is weird. Let me illustrate this whole procedure in a different way. Imagine for a moment you're God and you're just hanging out, you know, being cool. I'm God. What's up? This is great. And you're a little bit lonely because, you know, you're just God. You're there from the beginning. So you create some little friends. You may not know everything yet, although God did, but since we're saying you're God in this parable, you didn't know everything yet. So you create a robot first. And you're like, oh, I want a friend. I'm going to make a robot. The robot doesn't have a choice. You know, it can't just do what it wants. It follows its programming. And so, you know, you're God and you turn to the robot and you say, hey, you want to play catch? And it goes, if you want to play catch, I want to play catch. That sounds fun if it sounds fun to you. That's only like entertaining for a few trillion years. You know, that's not going to get you through eternity. And God's eternal, so this is it's a faulty mechanism. We got to do something. So then God gets this bright idea. And he says, hey, let me grace the robot with the ability to make its own choices and to choose. That way, even though I can do whatever I want, and I'm already done everything, so I'm kind of bored anyway, when the robot wants to do something, who makes his choice, this human, we'll call them now, they get to say, hey, would you like to play catch? That suddenly sounds exciting to me. It's like when someone comes to your house, some people like decorate their house, it's very beautiful, and they walk around upset trying to make it even more beautiful because it's not good enough for them. But then when they have a guest come over and they're like, what a pretty house you have, they say, thank you so much, I love my house, you know, because the other person's choice makes that engagement better. The problem is that we didn't make a lot of good choices. What we chose to do was lie, steal, and murder. So then another powerful entity, the chief angel of heaven at one point, something so pristine, it knows exactly what to accuse us of. They call him the accuser. The accuser comes and says, hey, truth. Hey, God. God's like, yeah, what's up? He's like, you know, this guy lied to this other guy, and that lie really destroyed what you were trying to achieve. It hurt the other guy, and you are the truth, and this guy just pulled you off your throne and put his own thing there, and it was awful. This guy doesn't deserve for you to sustain his life. He's trying to kill other people. He's trying to hurt other people. He doesn't deserve, he's not worthy of what you are extending anymore. You technically should cut him off. You know, you should let him die. And God was like, you are a very pristine angel. You're right. It's not actually wrong. But God also had a plan. He decided he wanted life. He wanted friends. So he made a way. He superseded the angel. He superseded him with Jesus. Jesus, a perfect person, went and suffered the penalty that was deserved of the flawed person, thereby allowing justice to be fulfilled and full protection from the accuser in every way. There's nothing you can accuse him for. The debt's already paid. And that kind of scenario was very luminous. It was a light in a dark situation. It's dark being accused, and it feels light and bright when you pay it in full and you don't just ignore the justice and help them go free. So let's just make sure we covered the definitions of grace by human standards so far, so we know what grace is. The dictionary says it's an unmerited divine assistance given to humans for their regeneration or sanctification, a virtue coming from God, a state of sanctification enjoyed through divine assistance, all kind of the same thing as in the first definition. I think we covered that. We have slides all about that. And then we move on to the second variation, where it says approval, favor. Saw a lot of that, like Nestle gets by my house, approval and favor. God bless them. Then we have mercy or a pardon, like, our Doty, Mr. Doty earlier, who was pardoned for his murderous crimes by being a participant in other murderous crimes. Not very pretty, but that's what it is. It's also a special favor or privilege, I don't know why God chooses who he chooses exactly. It seems to be just based on faith and nothing more. It's just a privilege based on faith. We can go through this, but I believe you get the point. The point is that, grace has a few different forms. Most of them are just, an outright shattering of what seems to make sense of what they deserve and gives them something above and beyond, seemingly for no reason, like a little light in the darkness. One thing I would like to talk about is in the UK, they have, monarchs and stuff, and they say, oh, your grace, your grace. I have no idea why they call them your grace. They're scary. They just do whatever they want. Whereas if you were to call Jesus, the royalty I identify with, your grace, I would be able to discern what that meant. All right, so we're going to get to part 2, and we're going to talk about why divine grace is essential for all life. Not just a nice bonus to it, but absolutely essential. Let's take a look at life. Start out as babies. Babies are completely worthless. Now, some parents mistakenly believe that these are cute, they have a value. I think that that's probably a hypnotic illusion brought on by the baby's ability to prevent the parents from ever resting. You start to get weird later and you think all kinds of things when you haven't slept in a long time. But babies, they don't clean or wash things, they don't contribute. They just create messes and problems and demands and then prevent you from resting enough to meet those demands. Thanks, baby. Paul has this to say about babies, I think, because we know babies do not work, but they eat pretty much anything they can get their hands on without discrepancy. Paul, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, says feeding such people is not recommended. If you don't work, you don't eat. Truly, deep grace is required from the beginning of life. Then later, you develop a little more into a young person. And young people are not better than babies, they're worse. Their power has grown in their ability to destroy. Pastor Paul might be finding this out soon if he hasn't figured it out already as his kids grow up. But basically, if you thought they were evil before, now they have the ability to trick you into thinking that they're probably good for a moment, So they have another layer of deception, like they can say things now like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, like they're lying. Don't fall for it, or you'll just be twice as hurt when you realize how dark they are. Then you get to, which again, grace is absolutely required for young people, particularly if you don't extend it to them when they start forming their basic understanding. It actually makes them worse. Then you get to a middle life stage or a middle person. I have this fine example of a middle person here. These are slightly better than young people only because they trouble their parents less. If they're blessed enough to know God, they move all their troubles straight to Him directly, which is easier for the rest of us. So you could say that a middle person is slightly better than a young person or a baby, but it is debatable depending on how it lands, you know. Anyway, then you become an old person. An old person is mostly about awakening to how little you understood as a middle person. You actually start to realize how bad you were as a middle person. Another bad trait of a middle person is that they fool themselves into thinking they're good. And then by the time they get older, they go, oh, I really messed that up. I had no idea then. And that's why old people are the best, because they at least realize all the problems they've been causing their entire life. So in conclusion, I'm sure you can see that absolute grace is required for life to continue at every single stage. So this is why grace is required for life. But what about performance? Let's look at human performance for a bit. These graphs I'm showing are a representative of relative goodness. We have on the left side man's perspective, where you got a person that's person one, he's only like 10% good. Person two is like 3 times better than that at 30% good. Person three is twice as good as that guy at 60%. And person four is the best person we know at 100% goodness. Now, our scale only covers what we know, and what we know is based upon what we have at hand and what we can see. So, we judge the worst person ever at 0 and the best person ever at 100. But if we switch this to God's scale, which this graph is not accurate showing God's goodness, I could only make it go up to 1,000,000, but God's actually goes on to infinity. You start to see that from God's perspective, they all look about the same. The guy who is twice as good as the other guy, it's almost indiscernible from here. They're all very, very low. So another detail to this is if you think about goodness like a race, the finish line is an infinite amount of distance away. So which of these people are closer to the finish line? None of them. None of them are closer, not technically. It's really just about, Jesus fulfilling the grace as a whole. Jesus fulfills the grace for mankind, and his righteousness completes us, and that's the only option, from my perspective, at least. Looking at these graphs, we can also learn a few things. For example, when it says God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble, what's the reason for that? Well, you got a prideful person number 4, saying, hey, I'm like way better than these other guys, God. Don't you think I'm great? And God focuses back to look at greatness from his perspective. And he goes, what? What are you talking about? You look real tiny like everybody else. What are you talking about? And you're kind of dark for saying that. Then we have, a humble person who is basically saying, God, I am so sorry that this is all I have. But God can shift his focus again, comparing that person to 0 to see what they have. And really, you're kind of an infinite distance away from 0 as well. The reason I say that is because you can cut that distance in half an infinite amount of times, and you'll never get there. If you only had half of what you had, you still have more than 0. If you have half of that, you still have more than 0. If you have half of that, all the way down, never goes away. So when you're like, God, I'm so sorry, I'm awful, I'm not on the level, God's like, what are you talking about? From God, it's very confusing talking to people. They're kind of weird. That's how it seems to me anyway. Also, another deceitful quality to human evaluations of performance, which the reason I'm going into this is because grace is is beyond what you deserve. So if we try to be as good as possible, maybe we can escape needing grace. It doesn't work like that. You're never going to get there. And there's also a lot of weird dynamics at play that we don't usually get to see. For example, person one, who's only 10% good now, Maybe he started from negative 5 billion% and he's way better than the other person that went to 100. You don't know where he came from. You don't know what he had to work with. You don't know what opposed him. There's dynamics. If we take, say, Kobe Bryant as an example for performance, he's like the best basketball player ever, arguably. Maybe Michael Jordan disagrees, but I would say Kobe's a little bit better. I know a lot of people are mad at that, but whatever. If Kobe Bryant was born with no hands, would he be a good basketball player? No. No, he would not. He would not be the best basketball player ever. He might be able to be okay at it. He wouldn't be a different person. His internal evaluation wouldn't be different. He was just working with different dynamics. If you made Kobe Bryant now play against him at his worst would be far better than he is now because he's dead now. So he's not going to win that game. And really, that's where human performance gets you in the end. Another side note here, which I want to just go into briefly, is about trauma. I want to bring up trauma because when we're evaluating people, a lot of times it's very hard to see how trauma has impacted them. So it's not just that they're starting from negative, it's like they can't even get into the correct gear to start trying to perform. The reason trauma works in this way, the United States studied this, by the way. They had a program called MK Ultra where they were trying to study trauma-based mind control and it kind of works similarly to shock. Has anybody here ever been in shock before? Shock is a wild experience if you haven't felt it. I once was playing with swords and I cut my hand really bad, and my pain level went from a 0 before I was cut to a 10 in like a second, but then it kept going and the pain turned off completely. So even though my hand was like a weird flap and it was all cut, I could have sewn that up, no problem. Felt no pain, didn't need any assistance at all. With this quality of shock, this ability for God to cut you off from things that are maybe too much to handle, part of your personality, your mind can get sealed in that same capacity with emotional trauma. So the United States was studying this by torturing people and embedding commands. They would say, you must do this, and then they would torture them, and the person they were tortured so bad they couldn't address even what happened to them. And that command that was sealed within would only be let out by using special tools to regain them access and special other commands. So you can be cut off from sections of your personality entirely and may not even be aware of it due to the trauma that you incurred, in the same way that shock works. Okay? Now, Jesus is not he's not evaluating your performance. He is your performance. He is all righteousness for mankind. He completely fixes this in one shot. Let's take a look at Christian performance for a moment. And we'll see if we can evaluate some Christian performance and how much grace is needed. So here we see a guy who is typically well-respected, Joel Osteen. He's got a huge following, talks to a lot of people. He's got a huge house up there too, if you see it. Very pretty. This guy is a messenger of God, okay? And he may feel he deserves a giant house, and he may feel that, he is the best ever. He speaks to millions of people and all these things. But have you ever heard the expression, don't shoot the messenger? You don't reward the messenger either. The king makes the decree. The messenger just delivers the package. When the delivery postman comes to your door and he's like, hey, I got the diamonds you ordered, aren't you going to thank me? I'm providing these diamonds to you. You're like, I paid for them, they're mine, but they're not even diamonds anyway. So I wouldn't order diamonds. I don't have that kind of money. But if the UPS man or postman or whoever brings you a box of diamonds from him, then you would reward him. But see, that's the thing. When you're serving God as his messenger, you're not the one who is rewarded for what that message brings. That all goes to the king. It's the glory of the king. So, there was a miracle that happened with Joel Osteen a couple years ago as another example of grace. And the miracle was that Texas was completely flooded and everyone was driven from their homes in his area. All of the buildings surrounding his church were full, housing people who had lost their homes, but his church was closed. He wasn't helping them. Some people went online and posted pictures of this on social media and talked about it, and there was a bit of public outrage. And Joel Osteen decided to change his positioning there by opening the church at the outrage, getting some beds for them to sleep on, and he opened the church. So that was kind of a miracle. It turned him into a graceful, nice person. Now, of course, his official position on this is that, my doors were never closed, etc. It's like, well, they certainly weren't open. We got pictures before and after. So what do you mean by that? I'm not sure, but I'll just grace it to you. Best of luck. In another element of this kind of expression, a lot of people who have spoken to many souls and say, I've saved so many souls with my speech. Did you? You delivered a message. I don't know if that's you saving them, but fine. And they expect to go to heaven and sit at a really high table, and they're going to be far above all the little people below them that kind of, these minor contributors in the congregation. Well, he's on the grand stage. But I have a feeling that it's not going to work out like that exactly, especially when you've taken from these minor contributors who don't have much and used it to live in excessive luxury and abundance. There's an expression called wolf in sheep's clothing, but sometimes wolves come in rich clothing too. They don't even need to dress like sheep. Weird. So let's look at some other servants of God and see how that works out. These pictures I took in India, and these people spoke to me so many things. Let's see if you can hear them. Although they, again, I don't speak the Indian native language, but they managed to communicate with me sufficiently anyway. We got this kid in the upper left near some trash, but that's not some trash. That's actually his sprawling one-roof estate, similar to Joel Osteen's mansion. If you look into his eyes carefully, do you see anything of value there? Did you learn something profound? Did you learn something maybe more profound than you could have seen at a multi-million-dollar church? Well, I did. I thought that was profound, what he had to say. We look to the bottom left. Now, these two, the old woman and the young girl, they're not related, but they ended up buddying up. The girl is an orphan, lost her entire family. The old woman is a widow, outlived her entire family, and all they had was each other. Do these understand about grace? Are these speaking to you? I think they are. To the right, we see a bunch of kids. These kids are all happy. They were excited to see a camera. They were excited because someone was there. Nobody comes to visit them. And that joy on their faces, I have rarely seen in mansions myself. What can they teach us that's valuable? So looking at the servants of God, it's not easily identifiable from man's perspective how valuable things are. But if you spend a little time thinking about it and get trained up, you can start to see it. As a matter of fact, I experienced a miracle myself in that exact village. I was here. The story goes like this. I had just left Nigeria hanging out with Paul, and this was just like a couple days later. And if Paul remembers my experience in Nigeria, it was mostly about him dragging me around to places and telling me to speak or do something. I had no idea what was going on. But India worked very similarly to this, where my friend was just kind of taking me around and I didn't know what to expect. And so we're in the car and I'm like, hey, where are we going? He's like, oh, we're going to go see a bunch of orphans and widows and you're going to tell them a message to help them. And I was like, oh God, because I had no money. I had nothing to offer. I felt I was, this was terrifying. I really needed some divine grace on this process. I had no time to prepare. I had no time to think about anything clever. And I took this picture like 2 seconds before I started speaking. And you can't really see it in this picture, but there's a guy in a yellow shirt up there. He's standing in a doorway. And even though the camera can't see out the doorway, I could see out the doorway. And just as I started to speak, just as it was time for me to give them something to help them. Outside that door, there was a small idol on the ground. It was like a foot and a half tall, and it was just sitting on the ground. A rich man gets out of his car. He was driving a Mercedes. What he was doing in this side of town, I have no idea. But he just happened to show up exactly in this exact moment. And he got out of his car and he started bowing down before the statue. You know, he's bowing to the little elephant-headed dude. So all of a sudden, I felt like I had the words that would help these people. And I said, hello, I was told that you guys are all really poor, and that's sad, and that I'm supposed to say something encouraging. Look out the door right there. Turn around and look. And they all turned around and they could all see the guy bowing down to the statue. I said, you see that guy bowing down to something lifeless in all of his riches, lowering himself to below nothing? That guy is poor. See, you have a living God, but that guy is worshiping something that is dead. So you tell me what poverty looks like. And they thought that this was pretty good, you know, but it wasn't enough. You know, I still felt like something was missing. I didn't know what to do, and God told me what to do directly. I don't know how God speaks to everybody or if anybody else has had like prophetic vision or anything, but for me, it feels like getting hit with a beam of light that I have to start unpacking to see what it means. Anyway, what God said to me is, he said, feed the entire village. And I argued with him. I was like, dude, you are God. You know what my bank account looks like. I am halfway around the world with absolutely nothing, and I've got a long way to go. Feeding these people, you know, I get it, I want to, but it's gonna put me in a horrifying position. It's gonna make it to where I can't continue the journey you sent me on. Why would you ask me to do anything so crazy? God didn't really explain himself to me. He just said, feed the entire village. So I said, okay, I'll feed the entire village. And I turned to my friend there and I asked him, I was like, hey, how much to feed the whole village? And he was like, what? And I was like, that's just what I was told to do, so that's what I'm going to do, you know? And he sat down and did some math for a bit. He said, there's about 400 people in this village, something like that. And so we calculated that to feed 400 people, it would require about $150, which was most of what I had. I felt, you know, I didn't have a lot, and I was like, oh, that's going to hurt, but whatever, let's do it. The problem is as soon as we announced that there was free food, we weren't just feeding this village, we were feeding all of the villages in the surrounding countryside. We had, you know, thousands of people show up. And we only bought food for a few hundred, so you'd think that we would run out. But it was actually a miracle of divine grace because we had more than enough food for everybody. As a matter of fact, after feeding thousands of people on a few hundred people worth of food, we had leftover bags of food. It genuinely, I know this sounds cliche or stupid or something, but to me, it genuinely looked like we had as much food as we started with. And all the widows, which all the people here are orphans and widows in this picture you're looking at, they gathered them together, orphans and widows. They all went home with huge bags of food. There was enough even left over to sustain them for months. So this was, a part I skipped here, actually. Something else that's I think is important. When we were doing the feeding, I didn't want to like be in a privileged position, you know. I wasn't thinking of them. I wasn't the one whose idea this was. I, as a matter of fact, kind of argued with God. I was like Joel Osteen, like, I don't want to open the church. It's a little dirty, you know. I don't know what's going to happen. How can I complete my mission if we do this? But, you know, so I was just sitting on the floor and I didn't say anything. All the people were really confused by this. They were like, why is this guy feeding everyone and not speaking? Usually when anyone feeds, you know, they make you listen to a long sermon first and then they feed you. This guy is weird. And they demanded that I get up and speak. So I stood up and I just said, hey guys, Jordan, and I was not thinking of you. I did not do this because it sounded sweet to me. I did not do this to try to be loving. I did this because God told me to do it, and I was scared not to do what he said. So if you want to thank somebody, thank God. And I sat back down and continued, and that was it. Well, that was enough for about 800 people to give their life to Christ that day. So it worked out really well, and I did survive my journey ultimately, and everything is okay. It was a complete miracle from God all the way through. It was really a true example of divine grace. Now, why is divine grace only possible through Jesus? Part 3. Well, let's take a look. Here are some of the major non-Christian religions, okay? Now, I do not practice these religions. I do not believe what they believe, how they believe it. So when I sit here talking about what they believe, I'm going to make some people angry. But the thing is I traveled the world talking to experts from all these fields. And while I'm not entirely qualified, I can only speak from personal observation, and very few people have traveled, through the world talking to many of these guys to find out what they have to say for themselves. So you'll just have to take what I have for what it is and be a little graceful with me as we go through. Though I will use some quotes from their teachers directly so you can kind of hear what they have to say. With regards to Islam, why is divine grace not in Islam? Well, let's take a look at Islam. A teacher from Islam had this to say about the Quran and about forgiveness and grace. He said, "The Quran teaches that God is a judge, and he also punishes. But God is not bound to punish, he is free. The justice of God, according to the Quran, is that God does not and will not inflict undue punishment on any person. So if you don't deserve it, he won't do it." It's already a red flag here for me, where I deserve it. Don't know about you. Anyway, he said he will not ignore the good in any person, but he'll ignore the bad periodically. If he wishes to forgive any sinner, he has the full freedom to do that. His mercy is unlimited and his love is infinite. There are many verses in the Quran and sayings of Prophet Muhammad on God's love, mercy, and forgiveness. In one of the prayers that Muhammad taught, he said, "Oh God, you are the most forgiving one. You love to forgive, so forgive me." And Muhammad, was explaining that he needed God's mercy and forgiveness all the time. It is wrong to assume that any time that one will find eternal salvation without the forgiveness of God. So that's the Quran position. It sounds pretty close, except for one small problem. It abolishes justice. Justice is muted in this procedure, and we know God's immutable, unless you're his kid and you drove him crazy, in the case of Noah, but still, keep going. God's immutable for the most part. No, he's completely immutable. I'm a little trolly and a little jokey here, so bear with me. And justice in Islam is abolished because all you have to do is ask for forgiveness, and then that debt is forgotten. So you go and you kill your neighbor, and his widowed wife starves out the rest of her years in some backwater corner of India. And, you just say, "Sorry," and you go on your merry way, and God's like, "No problem. I forgive you because you asked." Easy. That's not justice. That doesn't give her justice. That guy deserves to die. Christianity is the only religion where that debt is paid. Let's keep going. In Hinduism is weird. It's a complete train wreck, if I'm just being frank. I heard so many strange things, but there's a couple of variations, which again, Hinduism in India is like a folk religion. There's a lot of different versions of it. I went to many different temples, all teaching slightly different variations on the same thing. Their versions of forgiveness and salvation did not line up with each other. It was just like the Wild West. But one of the ones that stood out to me that I thought was pretty good until I looked into it a little further, and that was at a temple called Sai Baba, Sky Sai Baba. I went to an Indian temple, and they had a statue of this old man, and the teacher of the temple, the keeper of the temple, was like, "Oh, this old man is God. He created everything, so we should love each other." And I was like, "Oh, that's not bad." that sounds all right. I mean, as far as statues go, you try to make one for God. Okay, you settle on an old man look, and God's pretty old. That's not that bad. However, I realized a few moments later that this Sai Baba was actually a human man who had died in October of 1918. He basically got sick and died, but before he got sick and died, he was known as a renowned teacher in India, and he would do things like he was also a Muslim and a Hindu guy. I don't know how he managed that, but well and good. Where he would go to the temple and he would burn these, offerings to God, and he would take the sacred ashes, and the sacred ashes were spread around to promote healing. One of the details there is that the sacred ashes did not heal him because he died of his sickness. Maybe he gave them all away and didn't have any more for himself. Not sure how that worked. But this guy, Sai Baba, one of the things that he taught was that God has many faces or ways to reveal himself. And, Shiva, Rama, Krishna, Ganesh, whatever, it's all, even though it looks like polytheism, it's really monotheism with a polytheistic mask on it. From my understanding, it's polytheism with a monotheistic mask because they were all very different. As a matter of fact, let's look at how different they were. Shiva, for example, one day went over to Ganesh's house. And there was a goddess in Ganesh's house. And this is the story from India. This was told to me by Indians. This is not like me making this up, even though this sounds a little weird. Shiva went over there and he wanted to go inside the house because the beautiful goddess was in there and he was burning with lust. So I guess God is like a lust-filled weird guy. And Ganesh stood in the doorway and said, "Dude, you weird pervert, stay outside. You can't come in here, and this lady is bathing. That's wrong." And this really upset Shiva, so Shiva cut off Ganesh's head. So a murderous guy with a divine appetite for lust, that's God. I don't think so. One of the other three major gods of India, which are Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, who supposedly created everything in Hinduism, he was most merciful, and he saw Ganesh without a head, and so he went out and found the first animal he saw, which happened to be an elephant, cut off its head and sewed it onto Ganesh so he could walk around again. That's why you see the elephant-headed god worshipped in India, Ganesh. If you guys don't see how weird that is, I don't know what else to say, but essentially it's a train wreck. None of that makes any sense. They're just making up weird stuff. The stories differ from place to place. There's no linear continuity. There surely isn't any grace in that, but there's also no purity of any kind. And now bowing down to a statue forever is supposed to be spiritual. I don't get it whatsoever. Don't get it whatsoever. However, there is a book that almost sounds pretty close in India, which a lot of people quote from, which is called the Bhagavad Gita. And a teacher of the Bhagavad Gita had this to say about grace and forgiveness. He said, "The attitude of forgiveness belongs to a higher state of mind. One can attain the state and cultivate forgiving nature by self-purification through spiritual practice." The Bhagavad Gita clearly states that forgiveness comes from God only. It is associated with other divine qualities such as intelligence, knowledge, freedom from delusion, truthfulness, controlling the senses, controlling the mind, being fearless, nonviolent, austerity, charity. They cut off the head, they feel lust, but they're not violent, whatever. They go on to say about the Bhagavad Gita, God is an extremely forgiving by nature. He is compassionate, all-loving, friendly, and all-forgiving. One of the lessons is that you can seek forgiveness of God by directly approaching him and just asking for it, and you will be forgiven. So similar to Islam, whatever you did, you just ask, you get it back, no questions asked. But here they say that from God's perspective, all of creation is an extension of him, and you are a part of him, Therefore, when he forgives someone, of course he will, because he's only forgiving himself. So forgiveness and grace work great if you are selfish. And that's the reason, because God's selfish enough to let himself go free, even though I guess, he cut off homeboy's head because he wanted to look at a woman showering. It's a train wreck in India. I don't know if I said that already or not, but I'll say it again. Another experience I had there studying Hinduism was I went into a snake temple where they worship a cobra. So Hindu temple, they worship a cobra. And I said, hey, how's it going? Why are you worshiping a cobra? That seems kind of dangerous. Why don't you pick a rock or something that can't kill you, or that wall over there, or the tree up the street? Why you pick this cobra? And they said, do not question us. We are doing as our fathers have done. And they were very angry that I questioned their tradition. So I said, okay, so no questions, just obey the venomous serpent. This is great. It isn't. I don't get it. And then we had to leave. So we left. That's about how India religion feels, at least from my perspective. Moving on. We got atheism over here. In atheism, there's no God, no justice, no hope, no morality, no reason for anything. It is, you're endeavoring to eventual hopeless cessation from existence. You don't have there's nothing to it. A lot of what's funny about atheists is a lot of them get very offended if you talk about God because they don't believe it's true, and they got to be social justice warriors for the truth and tell you how wrong you are. But I'm like, why are you being a social justice warrior? There's no reason for justice. That's a waste of time. You're missing out on valuable moments of pleasure you could be having grappling with this nonsense before your demise. I don't agree with atheism at all, obviously, but I don't understand it partially because of morality. Morality is an innate sense. It's something we feel, even though they don't have a reason to believe in it, they still believe in it. So, there's this sense inside, this internal spiritual sense of light and darkness, good and evil. If God doesn't exist, that is all nonsense. So why is that there? They'll say, oh, we needed to evolve it, or we would have all lusted and killed ourselves to death, or whatever. Nonsense, just the fact that love can exist, things can supersede all the darkness around them for almost no reason. The fact that divine grace is even possible kind of proves God exists to me. But let's keep going. Buddhism is the other major religion here. In Buddhism, I asked, what about forgiveness and grace in Buddhism? And I got a lot of answers like, oh, well, you do something bad, you get 1 point against you of karma, so you got to do something good to try to, balance that. And if you do real good in your next life, you'll be something better. If you do real bad in your next life, you come back as a grasshopper or something. And I was like, man, if I'm this bad at being a human, how can I ascend from being a grasshopper? I got way more resources to be good with as a human. Am I going to make it as a grasshopper? There's also, I've done so much wrong. There's no way to make up for that. How can I possibly pay this debt? Well, let's just take a look at what a Buddhist teacher has to say about this. And he says, there is a false belief that if you forgive or allow others to forgive, justice will be abandoned because people will lose their resolve, which is necessary for action, unless there is some kind of fury to fuel it. So he's saying, you don't need fury to fuel your resolve, and as if that had something to do with justice. Doesn't to me. Justice is just they had a loss, they deserve to be paid. Has nothing to do with feelings. But let's keep going and hear what this guy has to say. He said, but forgiveness is not about helplessly accepting or giving up or surrendering to defeat or being weak or avoiding the cost of justice. It's not. How do you pay it? No answer. That's fine. Keep going. It is about how you hold in your heart a terrible wrong while you act in the world, and to correct that wrong, to try to prevent it from happening again, you forgive. The teacher also went on to describe this story. He says, there were two monks, and this is an old Tibetan Buddhist story, by the way. There were two monks who encounter each other some years after being released from prison where they had been tortured by their captors. He says, have you forgiven your captor? One monk says to the other. And the first monk goes, Forgive them? Never! I will never forgive them. What they did to me was horrible. And so the first monk, very monk-like and obviously ascending to a higher spiritual plane, says, well, I guess they still have you in prison then, don't they? And a lot of teachers will go on to say that forgiveness is about liberating your own feelings and finding meaning in the worst of life's events, that if you practice forgiveness, you free yourself. So it's about, how you feel and how you want to feel. And it's not an abolition of justice, even though it never addresses justice at any point in time. Do you see the problem? You see the problem here? Either A, it's karma, and there's points and you got to score enough points, which is a hopeless endeavor. Or B, we just ignore justice and hope it goes away. This is not a recipe for success, If there is an accuser, he will absolutely decimate every single one of these religions. So this is part of why I believe that Christianity is the only religion capable of offering divine grace. As a matter of fact, I've never even heard of a vague story, a myth, a legend that attempts to solve the puzzle of forgiveness and justice coexisting. They all just abandon one for the other. One wanes, one waxes, move along. But since they're both aspects of God, they have to coexist, at least from my belief. So let's check out the slides here. These are some of the spots that I was in. You can see in the upper left, I was talking to the Muslims. And what you can't see in that picture is that I was with a full military escort behind me, and when I'm talking to them, there was about 20 men with assault rifles so that I could even be allowed in that camp. The Muslims in that region had captured some white people from America the week before I got there, captured 9 of them, asked for ransom. When the ransom wasn't given, they beheaded them. So they seem like nice people, but maybe not. To the right of them, the graveyard there, you can see the atheists with their small graves in the bushes. There they go. That's atheist religion for you. In the bottom left, you'll see that's actually the Sai Baba temple I was in India. That statue of the old man is the Sai Baba guy who ended up dying, who they called the creator or whatever, and died of sickness, even though he was healing, whatever. To the right of that was from a Buddhist temple I was in, where they were telling me very spiritual things and all these nice stuff, but everyone does have to several times a day go and bow down and worship the statue. Not really sure what that's all about. Never seemed to make sense no matter who I asked. So how is Christianity really different from this? What separates Christianity? Let's take a look at some of the keys to grace. And the first key that I want to point out is from 2 Samuel. And Nathan the prophet goes up to King David, basically, and he says it differently than what I'm going to say. I'm kind of going to paraphrase it. He was a little more savvy with landing this. But he basically says, hey, David. And David's like, what's up, Nathan? He goes, if a guy, saw another guy's wife and he was like, oh, she's pretty, I want her, even though he had like 800 or 900 of his own. And he went over there and he killed that guy and he took his wife. Maybe that guy was pretty nice and he loved God. And so that rich guy sent him to the front lines of the war to die. And he said, I'll go for God because I love him. And then the rich guy takes his wife. King David, what does that guy deserve? And David was like, that guy deserves to be drug out in the street and shot. That guy is horrible. He deserves to die. And then Nathan drops it on him. He's like, that was you, David. And David's like, oh my God, I'm sorry. And then he wrote Psalm 51. So if you want to read about how sorry he was, you can see it there. But what this tells us is that when we sin, we genuinely deserve to die. It's not an abstraction. It's not poetry. It's a mechanical thing. The second thing to point out, Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I sure did. Even if you tell a lie, like one lie, you are ripping the truth from its rightful position. You are putting up a false entity above God who is truth. and you were trying to reign in his stead. You deserve to die for that. If you did that to a human king, they would kill you. How much more do you deserve it when you do it to God? So even minor things that we kind of take for granted sometimes, it's full death, you know, and all of us have done that. All of us. You don't live long without, committing some kind of atrocity, even if you take it as just a minor infraction. So now we'll go down here to Hebrews, the third part, and that's indeed the law. Under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. This is talking about the law of Moses. Now, when you sinned, you would sacrifice something to pay the debt that you owe. In Islam, they have sacrifice, but it's more about just experiencing a loss because that's somehow holy. He experienced loss. He sacrificed great. He's great. This is not about you experiencing loss. This is a mechanical, payment for what is owed, which is your life. So without that payment was never made. Jesus is the only thing I've ever even heard of anywhere that solves these puzzles completely and allows, someone dark to walk in the light and life. Whether you want to be dark or not, you still land there sometimes. Jesus had this to say in the book of Matthew, where he, was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was like, "Father, if it is possible, please let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." This was Jesus praying, going, "God, if there is any other way to do this without me having to go to the cross and die, let's please do that, because that's not how I wanted to spend my weekend." But God's like, as Isaiah says, it pleased God to crush him. He deserved, he had to go and do that to pay what we deserved, rather. Funny thing about Isaiah, one of my favorite prophets, and evidently one of my favorite little kids too, Isaiah had this to say in chapter 53, which I think really sums all of this up. He says, "Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or comeliness that we should look upon him, no beauty that we should desire him." Which, by the way, if you've ever seen a statue of super ripped naked Jesus hanging in a Catholic church somewhere, just know that that's not accurate. He wasn't pretty like that, according to at least Isaiah here. In fact, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. He was the type of person whom men hide their faces from. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. But surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He died on a cross. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that brought us peace, and by his stripes we are healed. So he pays the penalty himself. The penalty is not ignored. And iniquity is a fun word. Iniquity means I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I did it anyway. It's a little bit different than sin. Like sin, I accidentally, killed the neighbor and took his wife. Sorry, my bad. It was an accident. Whereas an iniquity is more like I knew that it was wrong to do that, and I knew it was horrible and a crime against God, but I did it anyway, just because it served me in that moment. And all of us have done that, according to Isaiah. All, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned, each one of us, to his own way. And God has laid upon him, Jesus, the iniquity of us all. So he pays the full penalty for all the horrors we have done. So what are the consequences of that? What are the consequences both now and forever from that perspective? Here's the temporal consequences that I laid out. One of the first consequences are you really just have to forgive everybody else. Jesus says this, he says, if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. You're not going to be a hypocrite in this procedure. He doesn't like hypocrites. Why is this required? Well, it's required because you didn't make it. You deserve to die. Then you go and get weird at someone else who deserves to die just like you because they deserve to die. And you expect me to forgive you when you won't forgive them? Nonsense. We're not doing that. One of the consequences of divine grace is that you got to practice it. The second part is you must be humble. Jesus had this to say about humility: for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. We kind of saw how that functioned in a slide earlier. But why should you be humble? You should be humble because you deserve to die and you have life through grace. That shouldn't put you in a position to be arrogant. It should be like, whoa, how did I even make it? This is crazy. You should be low, gentle, and lowly of heart. The next consequence of divine grace is that you got to love even your enemies. Jesus says this, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. But why? That's nonsense. Why would you love someone trying to take you to die? Why would you heal the ear of the person who's going to put you on a cross? Well, the reason you would do that is because you want to be like your Father, don't you? Your Father God, who healed you and raised you up, even though you acted as his enemy in your sin. You're sinning. God's nice to you. Someone sins against you, gotta be nice to them, or you're not part of the family. Okay? So this is a requirement. This is no joke. There's a mechanic for this. It's not poetry. You are also to repent from sin. Jesus has this to say: not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Now, you could say that the will of the Father is to have faith in Jesus, well and good, and it is, but part of that faith is putting it into practice. For faith without works is dead, and putting it into practice would have you understand that, just because you're like, yeah, Jesus, love that guy, don't kill me, now back to my lying, murderous ways. That's not how this works. And genuinely, all those acts of sin are an act against love. There's no love in sin. It abolishes love. It disrespects something. You lose something. So if you are trying to live on love and be a product of love, but you're not practicing it, you're fake news. You're not doing, you're not putting into practice what God has commanded. It's like hearing the music and not dancing. You might be like me and you can't dance, but either way, love is a required process here. For Jesus has this to say further: you must bear the fruit of the Spirit. He says it by explaining, every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Wow. If you remember, Jesus withered a fig tree that should produce good fruit. It wasn't even a thorny bush. He withered it right before he went into the temple and kicked out all the money changers who were profiting off of God. Chased him out with a whip. It's one of the only times in the Bible where he was like getting pretty savage. Takes it pretty seriously. A cheat code for this, in case you're wondering if you have the fruit of the Spirit, is Galatians chapter 5. Recommend that you read that and you read it in detail, because he lays it out for you. The last thing is, you must be faithful to Jesus. You must receive this gift wholly, take it in your heart, and put it into practice. Revelations says this. By the way, it's Jesus talking. He says, be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He didn't say, wave to me from across the street occasionally, and, I'll acknowledge that. He said, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. It's critical. It's kind of strange. I don't know if we have time for a side story here, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's a wild story. I was, when I said he's not just waving at you from across the street. You got to go in there and practice. It reminded me of something that happened to me in the Philippines. I went to this town called Small Margus. It was a small town, has a small name. And there they were telling me about this guy who practiced witchcraft. Okay. He had three I went to his house and I was like, so they tell me you practice witchcraft. What is this all about? And he pulls out these three bottles, a small bottle, a medium-sized bottle, and a large bottle. And he points to one and he says, this bottle protects me from all harm. As a matter of fact, if you want, I will use it and then you can take a sword and strike me and I will not be injured. I didn't want to put that to the test because I'm pretty good with a sword. You can just ask my hand that I cut. Anyway, once upon a time, long ago. I also didn't want to encourage the practice of witchcraft, but I turned. My friend there was the captain of the guard. He was a military leader in the region. And I asked him, I was like, is this true, what he has to say? And my friend who was Christian said, yes, it actually is true. It does work. I've seen it. He runs into combat hot zones. There's a lot of skirmishes going on down there. And he'll run into bullets and everyone will die around him, but he will live and he won't be harmed. And I said, huh, okay. And then the guy points to the next bottle and he says, this bottle will heal you from any injury. Just brings healing. Isn't that nice? And I said, well, didn't feel very nice. Something felt wrong to me, but we kept going. Then he pointed to the last bottle and he goes, this one will bring you luck and good fortune and all of these things. And I was like, okay, so why are you practicing witchcraft again? He's like, oh, I want to do these good things with this good witchcraft. And I said, but do you know that it's against God what you are doing? And he said, no, it's not against God. Didn't I tell you these are good things? And I said, it's against God. It's against God. Don't you know the Bible? And he's like, I do know the Bible. I went to Bible college. This is not against God. And I said, why do you tell me that this is not against God? And he said, because I learned this from God. And I said, you learned this witchcraft from God? And he said, yes, I learned it from God. I said, why do you say that? He said, well, one night I went to sleep and an angel with the face of God appeared to me and taught me how to do this witchcraft in a dream. And that's where I learned it. See, I learned it from God. And I was like, that wasn't God. You only said it had the face of God. It was something masquerading as God, but that doesn't mean it's God. And we kind of argued for about 10 or 15 minutes, because I'm very stubborn. And he's like, suddenly he starts crying. This soldier, killed people, whatever, something touched him and he started crying. And I said, why are you crying? And he said, because you're right. I said, what do you mean? You just told me I was wrong. It came from God. And now suddenly you're saying it was right. Why do you say that I was right? He said, well, because I didn't tell you about one part. And I said, really? What detail did you leave out? He said, the angel that appeared to me that taught me to do this told me I had to kill two of my children to imbue them with the power. So this guy had killed two of his kids to trade them to a demon for power, and that was witchcraft in the region. And what's weird about this story is if you walk out of this guy's front door directly across the street, which was just kind of weirdly placed, the only thing you can see when you open his front door is the church. There's a church right outside his front door. So when I was saying, you don't wave from across the street like this guy, you got to take it in, you got to come inside and you got to practice. I told him, I said, hey, I'm speaking at that church right there tomorrow, right across the street. Do you see it right there? It was the only thing we could see. So of course, he's like, yeah, I could see it. I said, I know you must be there tomorrow. I truly feel like you have to be there. Come to the church tomorrow. I guarantee you will receive something good, because I got to tell you, God doesn't take your children away from you in exchange for power. He gave his own son so that you could receive the power of the Holy Spirit. So he took care of it himself. Doesn't need your kids. He's here to save your kids. And he's like, oh, you're not going to make me destroy the witchcraft, are you? I paid such a high price. And I was like, I don't make anybody do anything. It's not really my MO, but do you think it's really an honor to your kids' memories that you continue to use this, which cost them their life? I don't think it honors them. I think it's the opposite of honor. I think it's horrible. Come to the church tomorrow. I know there'll be a special message for you. The next morning, I spoke at the church and he did not show up. He wasn't there. I said, hey, where's the guy? I was looking for him. It was a good message. I had people crying, all kinds of fun stuff. It was deep. I was blessed by the whole situation, and I was like, why wasn't he here? I was grieved, So I sent somebody to go and ask him. The person comes back after asking him. He says, well, here's why he didn't come. I said, okay. After you left, he went to sleep. And when he went to sleep, that angel with the face of God appeared to him again and told him, do not go across the street. Do not listen to anything this guy has to say. Have nothing to do with him. And when he woke up, he was sick to his stomach. So that's why he didn't come. I was like, so the guy that told him to kill his kids, he's going to listen to him again? That's not a recipe for success. But we moved on. What are the eternal consequences of divine grace? Well, one of the eternal consequences is that you will have direct fellowship with God. In Revelations, it says this, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. So if you are in the clear, you will have direct fellowship with God, not through a veil, nothing like that. In the end, we will all be there together with him. The next thing is you will be holy and blameless. Revelation says this, no longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be here in the holy city, and his servants will worship him there. Now, what Jesus did already makes you holy and blameless. You know, even though you still kind of are suffering from the fleshly curse and tend to sin, struggle with that. In this other spot, in the forever land, New Jerusalem, doesn't work that way. You will be holy and blameless. You will not be practicing any evil thing. The next point, the next consequence of divine grace is that you will be perfectly loved. Revelation says this, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. God himself will comfort you. God himself directly will give you proper instruction, will take care of you, and that's what love is. You know, love is not, oh, I got all these feelings. Look at my feelings. No, it's the raising, even though it's hard. It's the doing things that may not make sense to justice. It's the, I love you and I'm going to take care of you all the way through. And that's what you can expect as an eternal consequence of the divine grace found only in Jesus and in no other religion. The last thing is you will have eternal life. Revelation says this, and night will be no more. They will need no light or lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. It's not going to be, oh, you know, if I mess up over here, I'm going to die and all this. There's none of that. It doesn't work like that. Some of the prophets have written that sin and all these things won't even come to mind anymore. We're not even going to remember that stuff. And good riddance, because I don't like it one bit. Eternal life, even though I deserve death, sounds like a much better exchange. So that's all I got for today. I think we covered divine grace, hopefully well enough to equip you properly for a long journey with God. And just so you can see, here's me. I'm Jordan. That's my friend right there. I'm a random guy. And you can email me at jordan@forge.house to give me any questions, comments, or suggestions. If you like this presentation, thank God, because I was totally scared. I did not know what to say, and I just got it done yesterday. I spent Christmas making the slides because I didn't get it done beforehand. It's been pretty busy. But if you do hate this talk, that's okay. Send me those messages directly. You can spare God that, because I'm sure it was my fault and not his. But yeah, that's my presentation on divine grace.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And thank you for putting in a lot of effort into the flight as well. Brilliant.
I tried.
Yeah. I don't know if people have comments or questions now. I'm going to say a few things. Just pick up comments or questions to round up.
Did we miss anything? Did we get anything wrong? Anything good from all that?
To you, five. Oh, I think it was really great. The breakdown of grace. a lot to take away, a lot to upload again. Took us much research. It's really great.
Well, good.
Brilliant.
That's nice.
Anybody else? Do you have questions? Do you have comments? It's always good to pick up after a session like this.
Not required, but hopefully this was beneficial in some way. Anybody learn anything or get anything out of it? Anything new? I hope so.
Yeah.
Question
Okay.
about when you mentioned about trauma and shock.
Yeah.
I just didn't really understand the relation to grace. I don't think I was like one of the notes.
Yeah, sorry. What I was trying to explain is that when we're evaluating grace, we're also simultaneously evaluating performance, right? Because if you perform well enough, you shouldn't need grace. And when humans, from their perspective, are evaluating performance, it's really easy to go, that person seems fine. Why are they not doing this correctly? Why would he act like that if it's all this? Well, sometimes they get traumatized in a certain way, and part of their personality is completely sealed. You have no idea what happened. Just like my hand was, which you can kind of see a little scar there maybe, which I could have sewn that up. Even though I could feel touching it, it wasn't numb. I could feel, but I just couldn't feel any pain. But that pain was a good message. If I was trying to play basketball with that, would not have gone well because my whole hand was kind of twitchy. The pain was so bad, it just didn't register with me. So there's a relationship, I feel, between trauma and addiction, trauma and habit, trauma and how you behave, which divine grace supersedes, obviously. But when you're doing the evaluations of people to see how much grace they need, it's good to consider that because it can be an underlying hidden thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
She said, thank you. Okay. All right. So I'll ask one more time. Any comments or any other thing before we close for today? And if there's none, that would be the end of this session. So thank you very much. There was one thing that just came to mind, really. I think with this whole grace thing, one has to just remember what Jesus did and hold on to him. Because I think sometimes, like Jordan was saying, we kind of elevate men above God in some situations. And of course, we can't see God. We can see men, we can see religious leaders and all those kind of things. Something happened, was it last week or so, speaking to a few pastor friends, and they were talking about how some people left the faith, stopped believing in God because of what one man did. Basically, a highly revered person committed sexual misconduct for over 10 years with so many women, and the person is dead now, and they found out when he died. So it's just all kinds of junk. So sometimes when people elevate men to a pedestal and then men fall because they forget that human beings are human beings, then we begin to walk away, or people begin to walk away from God and all those kind of things. So, but if we put God as our model, and just remember the price He paid for us through Jesus and all that, it always changes the way we view faith and Christianity and all that. So, I think it was a good one. Thank you, Jordan. And to everybody, all the students, will continue next week. I think next week is the second of timeline. Wow. We are going to 2021, and we're going to be talking about pneumatology next week, which is basically the Holy Spirit and its gifts, and we have another guest coming. So I think that will be in the morning. Isabella, are you there? At 10 a.m.? Okay, so 10 a.m. British Standard Time. So, Jordan, I'll talk to you soon. And everybody, thank you so much for joining. And have a blessed evening. And take care of yourself. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
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 Goodbye.